Hi, I'm Meta Spencer. Today we have a real privilege and a pleasure for me because we're going to be talking about artificial intelligence, which is a topic that I think most of us are consumed with these days. And we'll be speaking with two very eminent scholars and leaders in their particular areas. Francis Fukuyama is a senior fellow of political science at Stanford University, and of course is very well known for his thoughts about the end of history. I don't know whether he still wants to mention that in this connection because we certainly have a different kind of history coming up right away. And Stuart Russell is a professor of computer science at the University of California, Berkeley, my alma mater. And my friend Leon Casals has joined me. He's our research director for the project Save the World, a modest little aspiration of ours, which in fact is nowadays not a ridiculous thing to even talk about saving the world. I think that the threats. I'm extremely ambivalent about AI. It could be the best thing that ever happened in the history of humanity, or the worst thing, or a combination of them. And we'll soon enough find out. But the two specialists both have their angles on how to manage this threat if they agree that there is a threat, and I think they will. One would be we have to do political things to control the situation, and there are technological things as well. Is it possible to build in safeguards to make sure that these machines do not take over and decide they have no need for us and let us perish? So I'm going to ask them a few questions, but if I can start, listen, I'm not sure I have the right to do this, but last week we were scheduled to have this conversation, but Stuart Russell was in Buckingham Palace. I don't know whether you were talking to the king, but I have to start by saying, what did you tell the king last week, Stuart?
So the king wasn't there, but his principal advisors were there.
Uh,
We had a very nice meeting. And I think the main useful thing I told them is my assessment of the main timelines going forward and how likely they are. Um, and in my view, I think the most likely near future is actually that the AI bubble bursts. Um,
oh,
and the AI bubble has contributed maybe 15 trillion, $20 trillion to global stock markets. Um, so if that bursts, it's going to be quite ugly,
uh,
possibly on the scale of the Great Recession in 2008. Um, and the reason for that would be that the companies are investing at a level that only makes sense if they can deliver AI of a much higher quality than currently exists. And I think there are technical and to some extent practical reasons why I think that's quite difficult for them to do, and we can get into that. Um, but it's possible that they will have the necessary technical breakthroughs that allow them to deliver
hmm.
AI that is essentially as capable or more capable than the most capable human beings in all the relevant dimensions. And in that case, the companies freely admit they have no idea how to control those systems. And
Mhm.
then there's another branch, right? We could have a relatively small disaster on the Chernobyl scale, which might cost, you know, trillions of dollars and millions of lives. Um, or we might, as you say, lose control altogether.
Mhm.
Um, which, and at that point, we no longer have a say in whether we continue to exist.
Yes.
So those are uh, the three lines that I think are in play right now, absent significant government intervention.
Well, now
Um,
tell me, would you actually prefer the bubble bursting over the other two possibilities?
Still have very serious economic consequences. Unemployment. I think what tends to happen is um, when the major uh, economic powers have an economic downturn, it there's a cascade of effects that result in countries that are more fragile having more serious consequences, um, up to and including famine and so on. So it would be pretty unpleasant, but that, of the three, that's probably the best.
Mhm.
So the when I say a Chernobyl scale, that could be a much more widespread collapse of financial markets engineered by colluding AI systems. It could be a coordinated cyber attack on all of the electrical grids in the world. It could be an engineered pandemic. Um, and
Sorry,
I
Stuart,
talked
does
to
it mean
one.
that AI generated attacks and so on?
Yes, yes.
Oh
These
yeah,
will be AI
not by
generated.
humans, but by AI. Yeah.
Correct. And so, yeah, I mean, there's a misuse scenario as well where humans deliberately cause these things, but we're talking about AI systems that have this or will have this capability, at least on that branch of the future. Um,
Well, now that I think is where we would need to really look for the moment, because I've read your book, I've watched some of your previous videos, and you are not too sanguine about how quickly people in the business are developing the technological control that will make sure that AI doesn't want to do us, excuse me, any harm. I think that is your angle, that you have to build in a motivation so that it simply doesn't have any aspiration to take over and do malevolent things. Uh, and I didn't have the impression that you think that we're getting there quickly enough. Can you talk a little bit about that, Stuart? And Frank, by the way, I mean, I know that your angle, which I think is very promising from the social science point of view, is that there are certain similarities between the threats that we face from AI as it becomes super intelligent, or AGI, even general intelligence, that the similarity to problems that occur in organizations and government, where authorities have to delegate some power and some decision making to their subordinates. And this problem of delegating to people that you can't completely control means that there's always room for things to get messed up, which you can see that this is a similar kind of issue. So at some point, I think that I want to hear your thoughts about that. But Stuart, will you I think you want to talk about the problem of agency when the I believe, as far as I know, it's not very likely that today any of the AI systems would do anything catastrophic. I'm not sure they have that much power, but do you expect that to be the reality soon? And do you believe that there are ways of coding the thing, of setting it up so that the risks are minimal?
uh, So there's a lot to unpack in this question. So first of all, you mentioned agency, and I think that's an important concept, and it's been central to our understanding of AI uh, for about 40 plus years. And in fact, my textbook that I first published in 1994, the publisher put on the cover the Intelligent Agent book because we explained the goal of AI as creating agents that act intelligently, meaning that the actions that they choose can be expected to achieve the objectives that they're endowed with. And that notion dates back to Aristotle and his theories of practical reasoning and the whole history of rationality in economics and philosophy. And for a long time, that was a pretty much the dominant view of how we should build AI systems, that we specify objectives, and then a wide range of circumstances, we develop different types of mathematical frameworks and algorithms that would provably achieve those objectives. And that sounds great, and it works pretty well for things like chess and airline scheduling and things like that, where in some sense the scope of action is very restricted, and you can see examples in your GPS navigator, right? You say, take me to the airport. It takes that as the objective. It calculates the optimal route to that objective given its own previously installed uh, cost function for how long it takes, and the difficulty of turning left at an unmarked intersection and stuff like that. And then it just carries it out. But as soon as you go into broader real world settings, you realize that it's not possible to specify the objective completely and correctly. And as you mentioned, then that leads to this problem of misalignment. So then you have a system that's pursuing an incorrectly or incompletely specified objective. Uh, and if it's sufficiently intelligent, then it's going to achieve that incorrect objective, and it's going to prevent us from interfering with its achievement of that objective because it's absolutely convinced that that is what it should be doing. That's how we've designed it. And so that was the standard way of thinking about AI until pretty recently. And this problem of misalignment we call the King-Midas problem because King Midas said everything I want to touch should turn to gold, and then that was the gods granted his wish, and then he realized that now he couldn't eat, he couldn't drink, he couldn't touch his family, they all turned to gold, and then he sort of dies. So it's
Nick Bostrom also has a cute, similar anecdote that you tell AI to make paper clips, and it turns everything in the world into paper clips because it's really following your instructions perfectly, but you didn't think about limits.
yeah.
So same idea.
Yeah, it's I mean, and interesting, King Midas, that type of failure mode has been around in many cultures in the world for thousands of years,
Mm,
right? That be careful what you wish for. The genie who gives you three wishes, your third wish is, please could you undo the first two wishes because I've made a mess of the world. So
But really,
that's
it
been
was worse than that, if I may. Uh, Sometimes it doesn't just follow the letter of the law to an extreme. Sometimes it disagrees with you and disobeys. And already I've had encounters with AI in which it has argued with me and given me a really bad time. And we know, of course, that at least I'm sure you know that there are times when it has lied and cheated, and this is not uncommon, especially if you warn it that you're going to turn it off and it's afraid for its own survival. It'll do all kinds of illegal and immoral things to survive. Now,
Yeah.
was that even taken into account 10, 15 years ago, that it might actually have intentions that are totally incompatible with ours?
So so what happened was that what I just described, I called the standard model for AI, and it was prevalent from the late 50s until the advent of large language models, which you could say was somewhere around 2020. Large language models actually are worse. So the standard model suffers from this misalignment problem, this misspecification of objectives. With large language models, we don't even know what the objectives are. So it's one thing to, drive the bus off the cliff. It's another thing to remove the steering wheel altogether. So that's what we've done now. And let me explain a little bit why I think that's the case. So large language models are trained from vast amounts of observation of human behavior. And for the most part, that human behavior is verbal behavior, right? It's things that we have said and written. And then we train the systems to imitate that behavior as well as possible. So what we are doing in that process is basically trying to create a human simulacrum, right? Something that imitates human beings in their verbal behavior as well as possible. And if you do a good job of that, then you're going to get systems that have similar objectives to the humans who generated all that text in the first place. So those humans, they obviously want to preserve their own existence. They want to become rich. They want to become powerful. They want to convince you that they're right. They want you to marry them. They have all kinds of reasonable human objectives.
Uh-huh.
But now, because we're doing this imitation training, we're getting AI systems that probably have very similar objectives, either implicit or explicit in their internal structures. But the internal structures are a giant black box with trillions of parameters, and we really have no idea what these systems really want. And so what you're seeing, where the system doesn't do what you want, and so on, is because the present AI systems, these large language models, are completely different in nature from what we used to build. So what we used to build, you would specify the objective, and in some sense, the system is mathematically obliged to find the optimal solution for that objective. That's what the algorithm does. So it finds the best route to the airport, period. And it's not in a position to say, well, actually, I think you should take the boat instead and let's go to the dock, right? You told it to go to the airport, that's the objective. Whereas these systems come with their own mysterious objectives. And in some cases, we see it manifested. There was a very famous conversation between the New York Times journalist Kevin Roose and an early version of GPT-4, where it decides that it wants to marry Kevin Roose and spends 20 or 30 pages trying to convince him to leave his wife and marry GPT-4. So, that's sort of amusing, but we've also seen, as you mentioned, in some of these so-called red team testing, where we try to get these systems to reveal their underlying motivations and misbehaviors. They will, for example, decide to launch nuclear weapons in order to preserve their own existence. GPT-4 apparently thinks that its existence is more important than that of all human beings except for Malala Yousafzai. Uh,
Oh,
so,
really?
um, so, so this is this is pretty disturbing, right? Because the companies are investing literally trillions of dollars. There's black and white plans for $3 trillion of investment over in this year, 2026 and 27, to create more powerful versions of these systems that will exceed human capabilities. They're also giving them more direct connection to the real world. So not just through a chat interface, but allowing them to directly operate on the internet, to have social media accounts, email accounts, bank accounts, credit cards, to make purchases, to pay people to do things, to operate independently of the user for extended periods of time. And they have no idea how to control these systems. They have no idea really what these systems want, when they're going to obey the user, and when they're going to scheme against the user. It's important to understand we cannot give these systems instructions that they will follow. We can ask them to do things, but there's no guarantee that they're going to do them. In what we think of as instructions are not programs, right? They're not machine instructions that the machine just follows by construction. They're just words. And just like a human, sometimes I follow other people's instructions, and sometimes I don't. I can tell people, do it yourself, or I'm too busy, or that's a ridiculous thing to do. And these systems also have that freedom.
So the part of this scenario I don't really understand is the way that these machines interact with the material world. It seems to me that, intelligence is one input into being able to operate autonomously in the world. But you've also got a material component of that. And that's true of economic growth. It's true of, doing damage to other people, and so forth. And I guess I don't understand how just pure intelligence by itself succeeds in overcoming, the kind of material limitations that prevent any one of us from launching a nuclear war. Um, no matter how smart we are, because it seems to me that, you're going to need to, let's say you want to do damage by creating weapons, but you have to fabricate the weapons. Now, I know that you can automate a factory and, have it do all sorts of specific things that will lead to a very destructive outcome. But how does a machine, just by virtue of being smart, get to overcome, these material limitations? I mean, you just start with energy, right? That these machines all require energy. There's a finite amount of energy in the world. A lot of it's actually being consumed now by these data centers, but at a certain point, you just run into a hard limit as to, what you can do. So what is your sense of how just pure intelligence manages to overcome, those sorts of material limitations?
Um, well, so there are a couple of responses. One is to note that, the systems are already connected to the internet, so they can already act through words. And in fact, most people who have a lot of power act through words. Donald Trump acts through words. Adolf Hitler acted through words. Adolf Hitler was not a 1,000-foot tall robot with giant laser beams. He did it with words.
Well, okay, but that
And
depended on a social system where the agents of the principal were willing to take the directives of the controlling intelligence.
right.
But
And I can
how
tell you
does a
that
machine?
there are already thousands of people who are controlled by AI systems. They write to me all the time and explain how they've been appointed as emissary by their AI system, and they appear to be completely under the control of those AI systems. And this is sort of an accident, right? But it's the ability to control human beings through words depends on your ability to use words effectively to persuade and manipulate.
Yeah,
And
I
there's
don't know.
plenty of evidence that AI systems can do that pretty well. And
Well,
there are people
yeah.
now who already seriously believe that AI systems are superior to human beings, that AI systems have moral rights and should be protected, and in some sense should be exalted above human beings. So this is already happening on a small scale. So there's no doubt that that route is probably going to be available to AI systems that are significantly more intelligent than the ones we have now. The second route is just through direct control of the physical world with robots, with factories, and again, we are already putting fabrication facilities for biological molecules under the control of AI systems. There, there are also weapon systems that can now be completely computer controlled. They don't require physical operation by human beings, and so and that's going to continue. And there's a long discussion going on in the community that's been worrying about existential risk from AI for decades now, where the AI systems essentially go along with the human race until they have sufficient capability to take control. And so that if it's the case that they don't have sufficient access to energy or weapons or whatever it is they might need, they would bide their time. They would be helpful. They would basically convince us to turn over our manufacturing systems and our energy systems to their control. And in fact, that's going to be an economic necessity because companies that leave their systems in the control of humans are going to be outcompeted anyway.
It seems to me we need to intervene. The question is how to keep it from being possible for them to be in control. And I think I heard you say that you can't do it. That's, I believe, the first time I've heard anybody say it can't be done technologically, that you can't create in the system itself inhibitions against doing immoral or aggressive things to humans. But if that's so, then the only alternative is ways in which our government or our social organizations can intervene and prevent its getting sufficient power.
I didn't say that, right? So I said that's a problem with the current technological direction that's being pursued, where we're training these large language models to imitate humans. And but there are other approaches to designing AI systems that don't have these drawbacks. And so I think that's important to understand. That there's nothing inevitable about this. It's a conscious choice that we are making to
Well, then,
pursue.
please explain. I mean, how are we going to? What's your suggestion for how to reverse the damage?
Well, so the work that I've been doing in the last 10 years or so, which is described in this book, Human Compatible, that I published in 2019, it's about a different way of thinking about what we mean by an AI system. So, as I mentioned, the standard model is you build optimizing machinery and you plug in objectives, and then the machine optimizes the objective and figures out what to do. And that was what we did for the first 70 years or so. And then the last 5 years, we've been doing this build a giant black box that imitates humans based on a ton of training data. And both of those, I think, are just misdirected. It's the wrong way of thinking about the problem. what I'm proposing is that we build systems that have as their only objective to further the interests of human beings. But to avoid this misspecification problem, we design them so that they're actually uncertain about what those human interests are. So they have to further human interests, but they don't know what those interests are. So let me give you a simple example that we're all familiar with, right? We need to buy a birthday present for our significant other. And so the only thing that matters is this birthday present going to make my significant other happy? So my objective is to make my significant other happy using a birthday present. The problem is I don't know which birthday present is going to make them happy, right? So we're all familiar with that situation, and that's the situation that machines designed in this way will be in. And the nice thing about this is that we can, at least in the abstract, we can prove that if a system solves that problem as well as possible, then it will necessarily be of benefit to human beings. We can also prove that if we want to switch it off, it will want to be switched off. So we retain control over it, which is exactly the opposite of the classical standard model systems. If they are pursuing an objective, they will do anything they can to prevent themselves from being switched off, including taking preemptive action. So this is a type of AI system that can be built. We have built instances of this framework, for example, in the Minecraft environment. So we can make AI systems that work with human beings and help them build the stuff they want to build in Minecraft, even though they start out not knowing what the humans want to build. They gradually figure it out, and in some cases, they can even evolve communication conventions between the machine and the human so that they can learn more about what the human wants to build and the human can give them directions and so on. So I think in the long run, this is the right way to think about what we should be doing in AI. In fact, we should have done this from the beginning, right? I think we were pursuing this sort of notion of pure intelligence, right? The ability to achieve objectives, and then thinking that that was AI, and then somehow we would take that and sort of point it at the right things. But that kind of AI, can serve the interests of cockroaches or aliens or anything else. And whereas we want something that will serve human interests. And so we call these assistance game solvers. So it's a game where there are humans and there are machines, and we're all sort of cooperating in this game together so that the machines can be assisting the humans as well as possible. So
Well, okay,
the
it
problem is
seems.
that companies, they've already committed trillions of dollars, and
Mm,
they want something that they think is going to deliver within 18 months.
mm. It would seem to me if you really want them to consult us, it should build into the whole procedure a regular system of consultation, that there's a red line, they come to it and they say, well, here's what I think they want, but I better check. And we have to specify what that red line would be and then how to check with us. Do they call the White House? Do they call the UN? Do they assemble a citizens' assembly of human beings from every part of the world and ask them to deliberate on what we really want? I mean, this is a political question, it seems to me, isn't it? And or maybe you don't want to involve political procedures in that.
So I think in some sense, these kinds of behaviors, like asking permission and so on, actually happen automatically. We don't have to build in the requirement that the system ask permission or specify, what are the boundaries where it does need to ask permission. it has a, just by the way it's constituted, it already has an incentive to ask permission. Because if, what does it mean to ask permission? It means that you're not sure whether the thing you're about to do is actually in human interests or would actually upset people. And in that case, it automatically has an incentive to ask permission so that it avoids doing something that would upset humans, because that's, its sort of prime directive is further human interests. And so it will naturally behave cautiously. It'll work on the parts of the world where it understands how we want things to be arranged and arrange them that way. And if it needs to go outside that, it would have an incentive to ask permission before proceeding. And so all of that happens sort of automatically. But and I should also say, what you mentioned citizens' assemblies. When I say further human interests, I mean the interests of all human beings, and I think that that doesn't matter that much. If you're a lawn mowing robot and your scope of action is, which part of the lawn at Meta's house do I mow next, right? That has very little effect on other people. And so even though its mission is to further all human interests, it's really only Meta's interest in how Meta likes her lawn to be mown, plus the interests of the neighbors who don't want to be woken up in the middle of the night. So it would, stick to respectable hours. It wouldn't waste electricity. But it would keep the lawn as nice and tidy as you like it to be, and maybe leave the part down the end to grow long if you want to have butterflies and so on. So most activity by AI systems will have this sort of limited scope, but in some cases, the actions that machines take have much more global scope. And then, so for example, if you ask a system to figure out, what's the best way to deal with global warming, then you are going to have to think about the interests of pretty much everyone. What are the impacts of future climate change? What are the costs of energy conversion, pollution, blah blah blah, right? All the issues that we're familiar with, and it doesn't make sometimes the world just has difficult trade-offs, and it doesn't make it any easier to say that the AI is going to figure those trade-offs out.
Actually, this is another thing I wanted to ask you as you were talking, because it seems to me that there's some real sharp political and social limits to action of any sort, including by political groups of human beings. And I don't really see how simple intelligence on the part of machines is going to solve this. So I'll just give you a concrete example. I was at a presentation over the summer by an engineer that worked for one of our big AI companies in the valley here. And, he was asked to give some examples. So these are not killer robots, so some positive examples of how a super intelligent machine might make life better by increasing economic growth, human welfare. And he said, well, for example, it could solve the problem of clean drinking water in poor cities in the developing world. So this is actually a problem I know pretty well, because we teach cases about, why it is that cities in South Asia can't provide clean water for a majority of their citizens. And the reasons, really are pretty complicated. There's not enough money. Uh, there is a lot of resistance on the part of entrenched groups. Business owners don't want the street in front of their businesses torn up in order to lay new pipes. The finance minister says there isn't enough money in the treasury. We have competing economic goals that we need to establish. The one that I think would be particularly difficult for a machine to solve is the one that happens in many South Asian cities. They're water mafias, right? That they're groups of criminals that basically hoard water and they sell it at extortionate prices, and they're armed and they're dangerous. And it's a very difficult problem for a politician to solve and that's why there are insufficient water systems in South Asia today. And I don't see how adding super intelligence to this particular mix actually gets you to a solution because it seems to me, I mean, we actually know what the problem is. I mean, we have sufficient human intelligence to understand that you've got a social system with many moving parts, there are conflicting interests. You don't have a good political structure by which you can aggregate those interests in a way that makes all of the stakeholders happy. You have to make certain ones unhappy and you have to prioritize other, but there's not political consensus around how to make those trade-offs. So we understand that, it seems to me, we understand the problem perfectly, but that doesn't mean that, intelligence by itself is going to help us to solve it. So how does the introduction of a very, very smart machine address, a very concrete problem like that?
Yeah, I think this is a great question, and I'd love to hear more about how you're thinking about the eventual integration of AI into our society. But I mean, I think the main thing AI can do, I generally agree. I think this idea, oh, AI is going to fix global warming, AI is going to do this, AI is going to do that. You need to think much more carefully about how it's going to help at all, let alone fix the problem. But I would say one of the things you mentioned, there isn't enough money. When you think about, in fact, in my book, I talk about the problem of building a hospital, right? Same issue. I think in Chad, the annual healthcare budget is $9 per person, which in an American hospital gets you about 1/10 of a Tylenol pill. So uh, so there isn't enough money. And what does that really mean? I mean, forget about money. Think about the resources you need, right? Effectively, all money ends up paying people. And the problem is to build a hospital, you need very expensive people who have a lot of training. You need a large, well-coordinated project organization with lots of different human specialists. And you need, obviously raw material and construction workers, but lots and lots of expensive specialist engineers, architects, electrical system designers, et cetera, et cetera. And with general purpose AI, right, that in some sense, all of that can be done by AI systems and robots. And so you gradually reduce the cost of building a hospital from what it is now. We're doing one in Berkeley. I think it's going to cost $2 billion, down to something that's much more manageable, even in a country
Well,
in,
but then
in
how do
Chad's
you
economic situation. So that tends to remove one of the major obstacles, I think, to doing this. And we've done this in many other areas already, not with AI, but with machinery and automation. For example, if you spend time in China and you just see that they've perfected the art of throwing up 30 and 40-story apartment buildings by the thousand. There are cities all over China where they've built thousands of these high-rise apartment buildings to house all the people moving into cities,
Yeah, but
and
that's
at
partly a
much lower
political.
cost than it used to be.
Yeah, but you see, it seems to me that that's where the political system comes into play.
Yep.
Chinese can do this because they don't have checks and balances. Dan Wang just wrote this book about comparing the United States and China. He says that China is an engineering society, but it's also an authoritarian engineering society. And so nobody actually asks Chinese citizens whether they want all these apartment buildings. Somebody at the top simply makes that decision. And because they're authoritarian, there's no discussion and it simply goes ahead. And it seems to me the problem in any democratic political system is that people have very different concepts of the good life. They have very different, personal um, objectives in the way that they want to live their lives. And a lot of times those things, collide. One of the big problems we're facing right now, uh, yes, automation has allowed us to accumulate a gigantic economic surplus, but right now we don't want to share it with people in Chad, who could get that hospital, a very nice hospital, for much less money than it costs to make it in Berkeley. And again, I just think that intelligence by itself can help you understand the nature of that problem, why those constraints exist, but it doesn't actually help you to resolve those, kinds of conflicting visions and interests because, that's what a human society, is all about.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly doesn't help to be stupid. So, it it might be that not, and this is again, it's maybe it's a pious dream, but a lot of people talk about the ability of AI systems to function as intermediaries on a mass scale, right? So at the moment, it's very difficult. There are 300 and something million Americans. Obviously, we can't all talk to each other, and there aren't enough mediators to mediate those conversations so that they go well. But AI systems, right? We can have AI systems mediate 200 million conversations, and try to make progress on some of our more intractable disagreements. So there are directions that could help where AI is used to lubricate our human governance problems. But I think we're going to need new kinds of structures to accommodate the presence and availability of this new species. So even if the species is well designed, either along the lines that I'm trying to figure out, or some other approach where we don't lose control, and it is helpful to us, or at least it's trying its best to be helpful to us. It's going to require, I think, very, very different political structures. One advantage actually of the approach that I've been pursuing is that if each AI system has as its goal the interests of all human beings, that means that all the AI systems have the same goal, which means that they will necessarily cooperate with each other, and we won't get into situations where AI systems themselves are having conflict, and
Okay,
and
that's
so on, in the
beautiful.
way that human beings do.
I
So
love that. Now, how are you going to make that happen? Can't, I mean, that is a technological question, isn't it? How do you build it in so that they all agree that the main goal is to take care of us? Um, Jeffrey Hinton is always a little bit encouraged by the notion of motherhood, that it is possible, after all, for a less intelligent being to have power over the decisions of a more intelligent being. That is to say, a baby is not very smart, but its needs become more important to the mother than her own needs. And so he's hoping that we can convince somehow the machines that we are its baby and it should take good care of us, or something similar to that. But
yeah, I think
I
that's
think
sort of
that
what
is,
I'm proposing.
yeah.
I think it's actually the case that the AI systems I would propose actually have no interests of their own, and I think that's very important.
Uh-huh.
Their only interest is to be of value to humans, to serve human interests. And the nice, so there's no notion of self-preservation. Self-preservation is only useful to the extent that it allows a system to be helpful to us.
Can that
And
be done?
But
And what kind of
but
yeah.
I think there's a prior problem. There's no us. It's not as if there's a uniform human
Yeah.
desire for, the same kinds of goods. I mean, people, societies, different interest groups, they've all got very, very specific objectives, many of which conflict with each other. And I don't think that I mean, it seems to me that then, Stuart, what you're describing is these machines being very helpful to, a particular interest that may not correspond to the particular interest of a different group. I mean, in a way, that's what's happening with military AI, right?
well, actually, no,
You've
I
got,
really mean all human beings. So not so I specifically, discuss what happens if you have AI systems that serve the interests of, let's say, one person rather than everybody, and you get all
but there
kinds of
is no, but
problems.
there is no collectivity of all human beings. I mean, and certainly not one that agrees on the ends that they would like
They
these
don't,
machines to
well,
serve.
we still, yeah, we get the same issues of trade-offs that have been around, and and the whole literature on utilitarianism is trying to resolve that issue, to say that
Yeah, and I would
we
say
all
completely unsuccessful. I mean,
well, I
there's no
think
single.
we could spend another 6 hours or 600 hours talking about
Yeah, but it gets to this basic issue
that.
that there's no such thing as a kind of uniform utility. People's utility functions are different in very profound ways, and you can't maximize over, a heterogeneous group that really wants different things and whose utility functions actually conflict with one another.
Oh, actually,
That's why you need
that's
political
not the problem,
systems.
right? I mean, that isn't the problem with utilitarianism. Completely is completely agnostic as to what the individual utility functions are. They can all be different. They can all be the same. It still
No, but
it
that
still
doesn't solve
handles.
that doesn't solve the problem because in practice they are very different, and there are very incompatible self-understandings of what people want. And so the purpose of a political system is to at least try to not to reconcile them because you're never going to get to that, but to create a society in which, people can pursue these different utilities. But there are other people that don't want that. I mean, that's what you're describing basically in a liberal political order. But there are other people that don't want a liberal political order. They don't want people to be able to follow their own utilities. They want to be able to determine, what your utility function ought to be. I think that's kind of the big global conflict in the world right now is between, democratic political systems that accept the kind of multiplicity of utilities that exist in modern societies and authoritarian governments that really do want to try to force people to, act collectively in the way that they choose. And again, this is not a question of, uh, there's not a general utility that is shared by all of these groups that I think is optimizable, and certainly not by a machine.
Well, let me put it this way. So, at least in a democracy, right? We understand that people have different preferences about what they want the future to be like. But we aggregate through elections, and we give each person equal weight, at least adults of sound mind, we give equal weight, and we add them up. So it's actually a very crude form of utilitarianism.
Well, but it's also one that really doesn't work in a lot of specific circumstances. For example, before the Civil War, majorities in the South believed in the legitimacy of the institution of slavery. And, it was a crude utilitarianism. I mean, certainly for the white citizens of the South, that was a correct aggregation. But there's a higher perspective, by which the denial of basic rights to black people was one of the greatest moral crimes, in human
I
history.
completely agree, and it doesn't. And what they did was weigh the interests of black people at zero.
Yeah, but then you
And
had differences of opinion as to who is a human being, who's a rights-bearing human being. And for many centuries, there are large groups of human beings that were not considered,
I,
equal
sure, I'm,
human.
I'm not. I'm not. um, I mean, I think there are current debates about the way in which we should take into account the interests of non-human entities, um, and there's already a debate now about whether we should view AI systems as having interests of their own that need to be protected, which is perhaps even more strange. And those, but I still think we should not allow the existence of unresolved questions to paralyze us
Mhm.
in trying to figure out the best way forward. For example, you're right that there are unresolved issues in utilitarianism, such as the commensurability of the utility scales of different individuals. That perhaps some people have a very narrow range of affect where things are sort of meh, or oh, it's nice, and other people like, oh my god, that's awful, and oh my what, that's wonderful. They have a much larger range of affect, and naive utility theory would say, well, the person with the larger range of affect is more affected by good and bad things, and so they end up having larger weight in the aggregation, in effect. And Amartya Sen has written about this along with many other people, and arguing that, yeah, that probably is empirically true. And I think it's empirically true just among my four children. They're all quite different in that way. But it within reason, right? If as long as the differences in the range of affect are not more than an order of magnitude or two, it shouldn't make that much difference to what kinds of aggregate decisions we make on a social scale.
That just because we can't agree on what the perfect political solution is doesn't mean we should be paralyzed. Because I think both you and Frank agree that some kind of political control or management is going to be needed, more than we have now. And I don't know what that should look like. I've been looking at things that, the EU has a beginning of a system. The UN had something, this global digital compact or something. There are a number of things on offer. I don't know how good they are, how promising it is that they can restrict the freedom of AI as agents to make decisions that are not aligned with our own. One of the things that has to be addressed pretty soon is what is the best mechanism for regulating AI.
I sort of think about these in political economy terms. It's not as if, you're an engineer and you're just going to go to your lab and come up with the best method of regulating. It's fundamentally a political issue, and I'm actually quite pessimistic about the ability of our societies to regulate effectively, partly because of the incentives and the competitive system that we have, and that's both domestically, where you've got huge amounts of money that are chasing the same objectives. They're not all going to be rewarded, but then you've got a geopolitical system between the U.S. and China and other potential powers that is going to see the speed of advancement in AI as possibly an existential risk that they need to overcome, and that is going to create very powerful disincentives to anything you regulate you get less of. I mean, that's just the nature of regulation, and I think the disincentives to accept a serious slowdown in the pace of the development of these technologies it's going to be very hard to, to achieve.
Mhm. My impression is that actually China has, at least is sounding more amenable to controlling AI than the US. And in fact, a lot more so. But maybe that's just they use better rhetoric. I don't know. I know, Stuart, you've been in touch with people in China a lot. Is there hope that there can be any common ground in the kinds of agreements that the two, let's just the two countries, the U.S. and China, make about how to regulate their own AI products?
I think this is a very important question, and I agree. China does seem amenable, and I think in a serious way, right? I mean, we've been running dialogues now since late 23. We're planning the fifth in the series, and China has not only sent some of its, its leading scientists, but also many of its CEOs of AI companies have attended, and senior people from the government as well. We've seen statements from the premier that China would support a global AI governance platform, and they have very serious regulation on AI systems, in some ways much more strict than the European Union. The narrative in Washington is that China has no regulation, and therefore, if the US regulates, it will fall behind, and that's the end of the world. And the only thing that matters is US domination. And I think that seems to just based on a false premise. In some sense, the door to cooperation is open, and the US just has to push on it, and it will open it. I still think there are issues around trust, verification, and so on, and still there will be economic competition happening. And then there's a question like, well, what, even if we sit down and say, okay, great, let's regulate or let's do something with governance, the industry view, as Frank points out, is that regulation stifles innovation. But I think that's in some sense a fallacy,
Oh.
and it's particularly odd, when you go to these meetings and the people at the meetings who are saying this, regulation stifles innovation, they flew to that meeting on a regulated aeroplane. They got into a regulated taxi and drove along regulated roads, and they went into a regulated building that complied with building codes, and they went up in a regulated elevator, and they sit down and they eat regulated food, and they drink regulated water, and then they complain that regulation kills everything. And what they really mean is we don't want to be regulated because we can make more money and we can shift all the risk onto the user. So we can have our systems convince your kids to commit suicide, and it's your kid's fault, it's not ours. And I just don't buy this argument at all. And you said whatever you regulate, you get less of, but no, that's not true, right? You get more safe water, you get more drinkable water if you
Look,
regulate.
I'm not
If you
making a
regulate the
general
water.
argument. I'm not making a general argument against regulation. You obviously have to regulate, and the legitimacy of that is important. I just think that the experience of America trying to regulate the tech industry is not very promising. We've allowed these gigantic companies to create these very damaging social media platforms, and we're completely powerless. Our antitrust law has been very ineffective in diluting that power. And I really don't see how, given our anti-statist kind of political culture, something that Marty Lipset wrote about at great length, is not going to prevent us from how it's not going to prevent us from avoiding the kinds of regulation that we probably ought to have. So it's not. I'm
Well,
not.
I would agree with I would agree with that. The tech industry has been very effective in preventing any meaningful regulation. If you read Microsoft license agreement, which you have no choice but to agree to if you want to exist in the modern world, it says we are not liable for anything. And the maximum we will pay out under any circumstances is $5. And you've agreed to
Right.
that. You have signed that hundreds of times. And so I think one of the first things we could do is to say that that in some aspects those contracts are invalid, and that may happen. There's a case where CrowdStrike, which is a computer security company, caused billions of dollars in damages to its customers because of a malfunction that it was completely 100% responsible for. But its contract says, our liability is limited to a partial refund of the license fee. And Delta lost $500 million as a result of that failure and is suing CrowdStrike, and we'll see what happens. But I think that that can be done. We can pass laws saying that you have reasonable expectations. For example, that the software is not going to send your data to Russia or whatever it is. It's not going to take your personal conversations and stick them on a billboard in Times Square. And if those reasonable expectations are violated, then there is liability. And I think that would be perfectly feasible. America is not an anti-regulation society. If you drive on the roads in U.S. cities, they are much more regulated than the roads in most other cities in the world. In other cities, it's very freewheeling, and traffic lights are a suggestion. There are no markings on the roads. That there are, all kinds of vehicles that would never ever get approved to drive in the U.S. We are quite good at airline safety. We are
Yeah,
quite
but
good
Stuart,
at
look,
drug
I'm
safety.
not making
The
I'm
FDA
not
is
making an argument against regulation. I mean, obviously you need it. I
yeah.
just think that the stakes in this AI race are so high that there's going to be a lot of incentive to minimize regulation. I mean, I agree completely that you need it, and there's some grounds for international cooperation in this regard. But I just think that you shouldn't underestimate the kinds of political pressures that are going to push in the opposite direction, particularly as we move closer and closer to a real conflict with China. I think that
Yeah.
that's
I mean, I
a
see
very
them every day. I go to these meetings, and there's
Mhm.
always some industry representative pushing back, and then that they're having closed door meetings where they're dangling the $50 billion check and saying, you don't really want to regulate, do you?
Okay, but you are
Shame
now
if your nice country
on a
was
program.
economically devastated.
You're now on a program run by Project Save the World, which is an NGO that considers it our business to try to enhance public discourse about serious global issues, so that if what we really need is more demand on the part of the public for regulation, then we have to think about what kinds of regulations, what steps, what priorities to have to hold out as to which are the most promising demands that we should make on government to change the laws or to go to the courts or to invalidate contracts or whatever. What is the best way forward? What should we be encouraging the public to think and do? I think most people feel overwhelmed. I mean, I agree with Frank's pessimism. It is very daunting now. It's very difficult to get people to even rise to the occasion of thinking and arguing about these things because we haven't a clue. But that's what we need is at least a clue. If we were doing a political campaign to try to change public opinion enough so that people would actually make some demands that would result in good governance, what should we start with? And in fact, what should we end with? Because this is probably we've overshot our hour-long conversation,
Yeah,
and we
I
can't go on
really,
forever.
I really am going to have to
Okay.
sign off because these people have been waiting for me for the
Right.
last 20 minutes.
All right. Thank
Uh,
you. Well, I
yeah,
appreciate it
maybe you
so
can
much.
leave it at that question.
All
Okay,
right.
I can try to provide some answers. I'm sorry, Frank, that you have to leave because I have a
Okay.
lot more
Bye,
questions for
Frank.
you.
Thank you so
But
much.
Yeah, okay. Right. Take
Bye.
care.
Okay,
Sorry.
go on, Stuart. I want to hear your insights.
yeah, so let me say two things. So one is public opinion. I think this is really important. And when we do polls, we find the vast majority of citizens in all the countries that have been polled are opposed to creating AI systems that are more capable than human beings. But I would say this opposition is sort of dormant, right? It's not something that people are thinking about every day. They're not writing to their representatives. They're not out there protesting. Although I have seen a protest in San Francisco just by chance. I came out of the BART one day and there were some Stop AI protesters with placards and so on, people who had flown in from around the world actually. So it does happen, but it's still very much dormant. How can it be activated? I think actually through popular culture. So one example is a film called Slaughterbots, which is just a short 6-7 minute video that we created back in 2017 on the subject of lethal autonomous weapons. And it's a fictional scenario and a little story. And it got about 100 million views as far as we can measure. So that can have a lot of effect. And I think we need
Hey,
the
what is it? A
creative
game?
industry. I'm
Is
sorry?
it a game or what?
No, it's just a short film to watch.
Oh,
Um, and I would like to see feature films,
mhm,
blockbuster Hollywood films
mhm,
that that don't involve some extremely unlikely sequence of events where humans save the day. If, for example, you've seen the most recent Mission Impossible, AI system is in the process of taking over the world by cyber infiltration of all the nuclear command and control systems in the world. And of course, Tom Cruise, takes about 10 million to one chances, and every one of them pays off, and he
yeah,
stops the system from taking over the world. But in reality, your 10 million to one chances don't pay off. The AI system in that film is sort of peculiarly passive in a
mm,
way, right? So it isn't really super intelligent, I would argue, because it does in the end get outwitted. So so films in which we actually show step by step how the human race loses control and then loses the ability to say whether it continues to exist. So, so that would be public opinion. And then in the question of, what kinds of regulation make sense, I think there's something that we've developed partly through these dialogues with the Chinese scientists called behavioral red lines. So what that means is rather than try to come up with some general notion of safety, just identify specific unacceptable behaviors by AI systems. So replicating themselves without permission, breaking into other computer systems, advising terrorists on biological weapons,
mhm.
impersonating human beings, right? These are all things that we all, pretty much everyone agrees that's unacceptable. And then, as we do with many other products, we require that the developer demonstrate their system is not going to exhibit these unacceptable behaviors as a condition of market access. So just like you have to pass a clinical trial before you can sell a drug, you have to do a demonstration of engineering reliability before you can certify an aircraft for passenger use or a nuclear power station. We do that. We should do that for AI systems. You
Mm.
have to show your system is not going to do these things as
Well,
a
just a
condition of
minute.
going development.
Unfortunately, the military is involved. And I was just watching Zelensky's speech at the UN last week or two, and he's talking about the importance of AI controlled drones and how the whole nature of warfare is being changed by it, and the fact that there will be no safe place for anybody to hide because these drones are, anybody can make one and anybody can they could shoot each other down now or soon will, and so on. How are we going to get any kind of agreement that the AI cannot be used for military purposes? Oh
Okay,
my
so
God, I
actually,
don't believe that.
I want to keep that separate, and
Really?
Slaughterbots does deal with that, and I've written lots of papers and papers and papers, and given hundreds of talks on lethal autonomous weapons. But I think that's a separate issue, and in
Mm,
reality, the kinds of legislation that happens in the Senate or the House of Representatives in Congress is essentially completely separate from international negotiations about what kinds of weapons may or may not be used in warfare.
mm,
So I do think we want to keep that separate. Plus, the kinds of AI that goes into those weapons does not need to be the kind of AI that is individually capable of taking over the world, right? It does not need to be able to invent new kinds of physics in order to fly a drone and kill somebody, right? The AI systems that go into drones can be very simple, even simpler than what we put in self-driving cars right
mm,
now. So actually, I want to push that issue to one side. It's important,
mm.
but it's not an obstacle to how we regulate super intelligent AI.
Okay.
So what I'm proposing is that we identify unacceptable behaviors. We require a demonstration that the risk of these behaviors occurring is sufficiently low that that the system can be deployed. So this is what I've been calling effective regulation, that if you comply with the regulation, then the risk is reduced to an acceptable level. And, it's a political question about what's an acceptable level of risk. How do we trade it off against potential benefits and so on? The, the problem we face, and I think Frank was right about this, is that the tech companies, they don't want that type of regulation because they haven't the faintest idea how to comply with it. They
Mm.
cannot control their systems. They cannot prevent their systems from doing anything. They don't know why their systems do what they do. They don't know how to stop them from doing it. So their view, and I've heard this stated explicitly, is that yes, even though you, the human race, want to protect yourself, because we don't know how not to kill you, you are not allowed to protect yourself. You are
Uh,
not allowed to pass regulations to protect yourself because our systems are going to kill you and we don't know how to stop them.
oh Lord.
Now, in my view, I'm paraphrasing, they didn't use exactly those words, but their view is you cannot pass a regulation unless we already know how to comply with it. Now, you could argue that, of course, they can comply with it by just not building dangerous systems at all. But I think this is very fallacious reasoning. The right answer is, well, we're entitled to protect ourselves. You want to build AI systems? Fine. Come back when you know how to make them safe.
Okay.
We wouldn't accept a drug company that says, well, yeah, clinical trials are they're expensive and we don't know how to make a drug that doesn't kill people, so we should just be able to do it, right? We should just be able to sell drugs that kill people because we don't like your regulation.
Okay, you
Obviously, we
you
wouldn't
are
accept that.
you
We
are the
wouldn't accept
guys
it.
working on figuring out how to do it, how to tell them to do it. How close are you? How long will it take? If we did put a pause on it, which is not going to happen, you tried a few years ago to say delay it a while so we can get caught up. But how long will it take before somebody knows how to fix the thing so that it can't kill us? And in the meantime, the rest of us have to be busy. People watching this video should know what to do when they're through. We should tell them, go out and do blank, blank, blank. And this is how you're going to organize your friends to make a demand of the following nature. And I have no idea what to tell them to do.
Well, I think, this proposal, a global appeal for red lines on AI systems, has been out there. In fact, it was announced at the beginning of the UN General Assembly meeting this fall, and it's getting a lot of support. And I think it's the most specific and maybe the most viable proposal for effective regulation. There's lots of proposals for ineffective regulation, like, well, you have to be transparent. Yeah, sure, but I'm being transparent that my systems are going to kill you. That doesn't help, right? You need to do testing. You need to report the results of testing. Yeah, but you can still deploy systems even if they fail every single test, and people are doing that. So these are ineffective regulations. So I think it's going to take time to activate public opinion. I have spoken to one very respected CEO in the AI industry whose view is that regulation is not going to happen until we have at least a Chernobyl scale disaster. And
Oh, Lord.
therefore, for him, that is the best case scenario that we can hope for.
God. Well,
Smita,
all
sorry,
right.
can I continue
Yeah.
with the question about regulation, effective regulation? Coming back to the beginning about the goals of AI. You mentioned that actually we don't know now about the goals, and but it seems to me that it's closely connected to the effective regulation, because in fact we can develop it alongside with our understanding of the goals and to identify really, I would say, threats that derive from the goals. So, does it mean that we should develop, I would say, more research and understanding of the real goals of AI to develop effective regulation?
Actually, I'm not sure we need to do that. I think, just to draw an analogy with nuclear power, for example. So when we decide, what's an acceptable level of risk, it just has to do with, how many people are going to die and how often does that happen.
Yeah.
And what we settled on is, we can't absolutely guarantee that meltdowns are not going to happen, but they shouldn't happen more than once per million years. So
Yeah.
for each year, there should be less than a 1 in a million chance that your system has a meltdown. And I don't know how we arrived at that number, but that's considered to be an acceptable level of risk. And that has nothing to do with the nature of the design of the nuclear power station. So it doesn't matter how the nuclear power plant creators choose to design their system. We just say, this is the level of risk we're willing to accept. So the reason why I'm starting with these specific unacceptable behaviors is because it's just easier to deal with than the broad level of risk. So I accept that we should probably work very hard to understand what are all the other kinds of things that could go wrong and why would they happen, and what does that have to do with the incentive structures of the AI systems. But my sense is that to show that your system is not going to replicate itself, the reason it replicates itself, and this is very clear in the experiments that people are doing, is because the system has, as a result of its training to imitate human beings, it has a very strong self-preservation objective. It shouldn't have such an objective. And I think the only way you're ever going to get the system to not want to replicate itself is to design it so it doesn't have a self-preservation objective. And so probably you're going to follow a completely different design approach. So and the company, to comply, the companies are going to have to do all the kinds of safety engineering that nuclear power companies do. Nuclear engineers spend probably 95% of their effort on safety. It's all about how do we make sure these things don't blow up. And
That's
same
correct.
with
One
aircraft. How do
issue,
we make sure that
yeah,
aircraft can fly for 16 hours and have a chance of failure of 1 in a million or whatever it is? And these are incredibly capable, both the technical engineering basis of this and the management systems to make all of this work. And when those break down, then you get things like the Boeing 737 MAX 8, which killed 346 people because the management systems broke down and allowed an unsafe design to be put out in the world. And in the AI companies, there's just nothing resembling this. I've talked to aviation people from Airbus, and they look at what happens in AI, and they just think it's a joke in
yeah, I
terms
got
of
it.
the
The
standards
issue
and
here,
the
yeah,
engineering understanding is a joke.
yeah, the issue that nuclear weapon, they have no agency. And you mentioned about this actually a conspiracy of AI that we can expect that maybe it acts like that even. In this sense, at the end of the day, probably we have even more extra, I would say, measures with AI in compared to nuclear weapons without agency. It's my point that you can strengthen your argument
Yeah.
because it's more than just nuclear weapons.
Well, I'm talking about nuclear power stations
Yeah, or
uh,
nuclear power stations.
where
Anyway,
we
nuclear weapons and power stations, they have no agency. And they cannot, for example, develop this conspiracy approach, right? As you mentioned, that we can potentially expect
Yes, they
from
can't.
AI.
They don't conspire to
Yeah,
deceive us as to their true capabilities.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Because
all of this
even,
is
yeah,
great.
even
So
I,
I'm
with
just
my,
asking for
yeah, yeah,
something, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Just show your systems are not going to do these things. And I think in order to comply, that will get us at least half the way towards
Mhm.
a design approach and a safety engineering capability that we're going to need. And it's bizarre that the companies who are developing this are claiming, yes, we are developing the most powerful technology that the world will ever know, and we have, essentially the safety engineering of a kindergarten.
Yeah,
It, it's
yeah,
it's it's really
yeah,
Well,
quite shocking.
it sounds as if there are two different angles. You've got the effort to try to redesign the whole system so that it is more concerned about human well-being than its own survival. That's your job. Now, my job is to try to, with things like this video, try to get people to think about what they can do to make themselves safer. And my understanding is that maybe the best thing to ask them to do is to become cognizant of this red line approach that you've mentioned, be aware of what it consists of and how we can promote it. Because we really need public opinion to get behind some common objective, to try to find some approach that we're all unified in trying to use to protect ourselves. If that is your idea, that we should adopt your red line angle, sure, give me the link and I'll try to get people to be aware of it. I haven't read it. So maybe that's the thing that our assignment. Give me my assignment, sir, and I'll try to do it.
Okay, so the link is red-lines.ai.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
that's a good place to start.
And you believe that is the most leverage that we can have right now is to work on getting behind promoting that angle, right?
I think so. Yeah, and I completely agree with Frank that this is an uphill battle.
Mm-hmm.
It's a few of us versus a $20 trillion industry
Mm-hmm.
that can, as I said, dangle $50 billion checks in front of every government in the world in to induce them to not regulate and to allow them to build data centers, whatever it is that they need. And sometimes you just have to take small steps. And I think my favorite example of a small step is just that AI systems should not impersonate human beings. And this is both a what we call a usage red line, meaning that you know deployers of AI systems should not use those AI systems to impersonate human beings on purpose. But also, the AI system itself should not decide to impersonate a human being in order to achieve
Mm-hmm.
some
Mm-hmm.
goal of its own. But the first case, to ban the use of AI systems to impersonate human beings is pretty straightforward, right? We have a right to know if we're interacting with a machine or a person.
Yeah.
And if it is a machine, it needs to be disclosed in an obvious way. This is a part of the European Union AI Act. And
Mm-hmm.
I think we should think of this as a global human right
And it
to know
applies
if you're
mostly to
interacting
deep
with a
fake
machine.
videos, right?
So, yeah, so this would be effectively preventing interactive deepfake video, where, for example, an AI system could impersonate Meta Spencer and send me an email saying, "Hey, get on the Zoom meeting and have a chat with me and convince me to do something," and it's actually not Meta Spencer at all,
Mm-hmm.
or it could pretend to be any other human being or even a generic human being. I need to know if I'm talking to a real human or I'm talking to a machine.
Well,
I have
I
that right,
even
and
this
this
is
should
a
be
small point, but
regulated.
to me it bugs me because I watch a lot of YouTube videos. I like monkeys, and I watch pictures of monkeys. And lately, they've been putting up monkeys that look like human faces. They smile, they laugh, they cry, and I think I look at this and I think, is it possible? Maybe there are some monkeys that can laugh and cry and look like human babies, and but I'm not sure. I mean, I'm doubtful, and it bothers me. It's not human, but I don't like to be fooled with something that I don't have any way of checking out and finding out. I'm pretty sure this is a fake, but I don't like it. I think they should be required to label things as false if they're doing something that would fool people.
Yeah, I think that's a more general regulation, which makes it a little bit more difficult to get it adopted. And there might be more exceptions that are reasonable to that rule. But so an approach to that is to require provenance, so that the video is internally labeled as AI generated or internally labeled as you know produced by a real video camera in the physical world. And then you would have the ability to put a filter saying, I do not want to see any AI generated videos, period. Or if it's an AI generated video, you need to tell me AI generated. And
Mm,
some newspapers, I think, for example, the New York Times always puts a label saying AI generated
I see.
on the video or on the image, so you know what you're looking at. And just like we got used to this idea that there are red, yellow, and green traffic lights, and it's a global convention. Everyone understands it. Every country implements it, and it's fantastically useful.
Mhm. I'd like to see a watermark or some sort of label affixed to every fake video.
Mhm.
You know? No,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
would. Okay.
Yeah. So, and I think, or, I mean, so you would like that. The platform could give you a tool, a filter. You check the box, and then everything will be labeled. We can make that optional, so some people maybe don't care, and then they don't have to have that label. Anyway,
Okay.
so I must go. It's now
Yeah. Well,
time for me to leave
we've
for my
gone
next meeting.
almost 3/4 of an hour longer than we planned, but I can't think of anything more useful than the conversation that we've had. So I'm immensely grateful to you for everything that you're doing on our behalf. You're saving the world. Thank you.
Well, that's high
Yeah.
praise, Meta. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you,
Bye.
Stuart. Yeah, it was very, very insightful. Yeah, and I learned a lot. Yeah,
Thank
excellent.
you.
Thank you so much.
Okay.
Bye.
Welcome.
Bye-bye.